Today I'll get straight to the point. I'm going to talk about the Tomahawk Cruise Missile. So, Tomahawk, more commonly known as TLAM, which is short for Tomahawk Land Attack Missile, is precisely that. It's a land attack cruise missile manufactured initially by General Dynamics and now, I believe, by McDonnell Douglas, Raytheon Missiles and Defense, and the Hughes Aircraft Corporation. Tomahawk is frankly legendary. If you weren't familiar with the sort of workings of it before this video, you were certainly familiar with the name. It is what people think of when they think of a cruise missile, and it really was pioneering in its role, and it's been in consistent use since its introduction in, I believe, either 1983 or 1986 for the US. And because it's been in there so long, it has had time to be incredibly configurable, change a lot, and upgrade a lot. So I'll talk about why Tomahawk is really significant momentarily, but for now I'm just going to talk about the specs. So, Tomahawk has a mass of 1,300 kilograms and 1,600 kilograms when incorporating a rocket booster. It's got a length of 5.56 meters, which becomes 6.25 meters when incorporating this rocket booster. It's got a diameter 0.52 meters and utilizes the Williams International F107 WR402 turbofan engine, which I think itself runs on TH Dymer fuel, and then you've also got the other propulsion system, which is the solid fuel rocket booster for primary propulsion, sort of first stage of propulsion in some circumstances. So, it's a cruise missile. It's got wings, and it has a wingspan of 2.67 meters, and it uses these wings in order to maintain flight altitude of 30 to 50 meters above ground level while traveling at a subsonic speed of Mach 0.74. The warhead can either be equipped with a nuclear warhead or more commonly conventional 450 kilogram, roughly depending on the configuration, more conventional warhead. And the warhead can have a load of configurations. We'll talk about that later, but it goes from high explosive to submunitions to all sorts. So, Tomahawk has been successful, to say the least. It's been in service for a long time, and in that time, it's had a load of variations, a load of upgrades, a load of increased capabilities, and a load of sort of foreseen opportunities that were actually seized because it is something that's good general purpose and is useful in the long term. So, it can be launched from a variety of platforms, from VLS, from torpedo tubes, which I'm going to explain later, turret launchers on ships, specialized submarine launchers, and it can be launched from TELs. So, what a TEL is? TEL stands for Transporter Erector Launcher, which it's like a lorry, something similar to what you might see for a THAAD launcher. It transports the munition to where it needs to be, it erects the launch tube, and then it fires the munition. So, anyway, Tomahawk can either be used in an anti-ship role or more often a land attack role. So, while it is primarily a land attack cruise missile, it can be used as a naval cruise missile. So, we'll talk about the warhead for a moment because I think that's quite interesting. It can either be nuclear or conventional, and the nuclear warhead has changed with the sort of whims of contemporary nuclear treaties and requirements, but the conventional warhead is what I find interesting because that's what's most used actively. You're not going to use a nuclear warhead in conventional warfare. That's why the conventional warhead is called the conventional warhead. So, this conventional warhead has a load of different variants and a load of different configurations that remain to this day. You can have sort of classically high explosive warheads, which is the simple 450 kilogram model. But what I find interesting is the utilization of submunitions, and what we see is Tomahawk is one of the first cruise missiles to utilize this really effectively. So notably, I'd say it can use the BLU-97B combined effects bomb, and it can also, or did, use certain cluster munitions, notably the CBU-87 combined effects munition. And within these cluster munitions, it utilizes PBXN, which is something we talked about, I think, with Starstreak. It's sort of a type of long polymer bonded explosive that ensures that the warhead can remain cohesive and that you don't have stuff rattling around. And the way that these submunitions were first deployed, which was fairly, perhaps not revolutionary, but significant, was literally you just have sort of timer fuse, and you have expulsion systems simultaneously, 2 at a time, deploying sort of at a very slight angle, meaning maximal ground effect, and you can hit multiple targets simultaneously. And what we see with later variants of Tomahawk is that you can actually have certain submunitions which can go and sort of smart submunitions which actively target certain targets within the area of attack. So it's not purely dropping them and hoping you get as many as possible, it's active targeting. Anyway, we've seen a lot of warheads. We've seen the implementation of classical bullpup warheads. I think in the Gulf War they even had a specialized warhead which was designed to disrupt electrical grids. So I think that's pretty important, and I think the warhead, as it's evolved and changed throughout the years, has become pretty impressive and pretty versatile. So, another thing I am interested in, which I found really quite shocking, actually, that I was talking about earlier, was how it launches from submarines. So the way a Tomahawk would normally launch, or the process it would, sort of utilize to launch, is it would be transported to where it needs to go in the pressurized container, which doubles as a launch tube. And generally what would happen with these canisters is they'd be racked in an armored box launcher, and one can implement them into VLS, and you'd utilize cold launch systems because of the pressurized gas. For the submarine launched versions, and this, as I say, really did quite amaze me, they are ejected via the gas pressure vertically, sort of cold launch through VLS, or they can be deployed via water impulse horizontally through a torpedo tube, which I thought was just crazy. And I thought, how could they do that? How can you launch a cruise missile, something that is meant to remain in the air until it hits its target, underwater? And this is where the solid rocket fuel booster comes in. So literally it's launched out of a torpedo tube via water impulse, and then the solid rocket fuel booster is ignited and it propels the missile out of the water, and then it can cruise to its target, which I find quite important actually, because it means that, one, submarines don't have to expose themselves, they can keep a reasonably low profile while still launching pretty essential munitions, and secondarily I think that's fairly important considering sort of multi-domain munitions for the future development, perhaps munitions that can operate as torpedoes and missiles simultaneously, or alternatively, one or the other, or both. So I think that's quite interesting. For targeting and navigation, I'll talk about navigation first. Tomahawk uses a lot of what you'd expect. GPS, INS, just to say INS is Inertial Navigation System, and it's, sort of gyroscopic positioning within the missile itself. For actual cruise, in order to maintain its cruising altitude, it uses TERCOM, which is something we often see in cruise missiles, which is terrain contour matching. So it tries to remain as close to the land as possible, which is about 30 to 50 meters, I believe, in this case, in order to avoid radar and, create a low profile, and that's rather important, and avoid anti-missile systems. It also uses DSMAC, which is something I hadn't heard about before, which is Digital Scene Matching Area Correlation. So you can program and you effectively digitize or digitalize an image of the certain area, and that's mapped and inserted into the TLAM mission code. So during the flight of the mission, the missile will verify these images and sort of cross-reference them with what it has stored in its database, and if the image correlates with the image it sees below itself, it can adjust its inertial navigation systems, and INS can be updated, and the missile effectively corrects its course, which I think is quite an interesting feature. And of course it uses for the terminal stage active radar homing. So I think I'm going to leave it there, but I think go look into Tomahawk, because it really is a munition which has revolutionized the idea of a cruise missile, which has some really interesting capabilities and which actually continues to be relevant to this day and has been relevant for so long that it has become a household name. So I'll leave it there.